So far, we've seen seven of the eight different kinds of relationships that exist in database. You'll recall that in lesson two, we saw the single pick category relationship and the multiple pick category relationship, which are kind of interesting relationships because what they're used to do is categorize the records, or some people would say classify the records that are in a table. Then we moved into relationships, and really the heart of what I would call relational database theory is when you have relationships among subjects or subjects and subsubjects. So, for instance, in a supplemental table, we had a firm subject in our database, and then there were some supplemental records, some child records that were related to that. We would call that supplement a sub subject of our database. Junction tables, it's a many to many, and it was between two subject tables, but we created a junction table to make that relationship happen. That really what it did is brought in two one to many relationships to create a many many relationship. So you kind of think of the junction table as being a sub subject in our database, and I'm actually mentioned that one in the video for where we covered junction tables. That junction tables by themselves could be actually viewed as a subject of the database, depending on their nature. We talked about a student, a list of students and a list of classes, and if we took a junction table between those, in other words, a student can have, take many classes, and a class could have many students. Excuse me. Then the junction table itself would end up being a transcript then for each class or for each student, depending on which direction you're looking from, which perspective you're looking from. Then we talked about reference relationships, the fact that we could have two major subjects that have a one-to-many relationship between them. For instance, we had employees and buildings, and we said that a building could have many employees, but an employee would only be stationed in one building. And to do that, we would create a reference relationship. And then there are these two special relationships for what we call self relationships, the recursive relationship, which is a one-to-one on where you have a subject that is has a one to many relationship with itself, and then a couplet relationship where a subject is actually in a many to many relationship with itself. Sometimes you'll hear those called hybrid relationships. I like to call them self relationships because then it describes that it's really one subject that's in a relationship to itself. Obviously, in that case, the relationship is between different records of the same subject table. So finally, we're going to hit the last one, which is some people don't use it very much. In fact, some people don't use it at all. And there really isn't a need to use it from the perspective of creating a database. But it is still an extremely powerful relationship. It's probably the one I have studied more than any other relationship, simply because it has so many different uses. And as I've gone through the years, I have discovered things that haven't even found documented in books where this relationship is extremely helpful for you getting past certain problems. And it's called an auxiliary relationship. The interesting about this relationship is it is a one-to-one relationship. So the way I'm going to approach this, there is a tutorial. We'll go through the tutorial, but we'll go through the tutorial last. I want to talk about the mechanics of this first, and a little bit about why we would do it too. Actually, I'll probably do that at the very end. I'll talk a little bit about the mechanics, then I'll go into the tutorial, and then at the end, I'll tell you a little bit about the situations where you want to use this auxiliary relationship. So let me go now to an example. And I have this very simple example for you, just to demonstrate the concept. All right. Let's say we have a subject table called person. All right. Now, yeah, I know usually you would have a lot more fields in here. I just put one right now called person name. Okay, but you could have the person's birth date and address and phone number and email, whatever, whatever this is a whatever this database is about, you would have information about that person in that table. All right. Let's say one of the things I want to keep track of is a password, uh, some kind of security thing for the person, and also a PIN number and whether their security code is active. All right. Now I could place those fields in this table, no problem. All right. But because those fields are fairly sensitive, could be fairly sensitive compared to the other fields in this, and they kind of group together too, by the way, I could separate them out into another table and then form a relationship between this table and this new table. We call this new table an auxiliary table. And there is a ball object that is TAU subject plus auxiliary. Okay, so subject in those curly brackets and then auxiliary in the curly brackets. So in this case, the sub-subject, if you will, is security information about the person. But unlike a supplemental relationship where I would have, if I did that, I would have many security records. In this, I'm going to have just one. All right. In other words, if a person has a security record, they'll only have one. Now, here's the thing: they may not have a security record yet. Okay, I may not have given them anything yet. All right. But what I want is, I want this. I want in this case that if I add security information to it. By the way, I should show you that first. Let me open up the so you can see the data in the table. This one just has a name of the person. Okay, that's the table for the person itself. Now I'm going to show you the person's security. So if I open that up, you'll see those people again. This is the foreign key field. All right, that's why you're seeing their names again, and it's set up just like the foreign key fields of the other relationships. I'll show you that when we do the tutorial. The security, okay, so there's different kinds. Okay, this could have been, if it was constrained, I could have actually put a category field in here and a category relationship with a lookup, but I'm not. I'm just going to have them type in different kinds of security methods. Then a security pin. Now here's the thing: if there's a security method, maybe I should call this security method, but we'll just call it security. uh, if there's a security value, I also want to have a pin value. In other words, if this is a required field, this is also going to be required. So think about that. If I'm actually creating a record over here, then it wouldn't create the record unless I put both these values in here. But the cool thing about a one-to-one is I don't have to create this record at all. So in other words, if there isn't a security method, then I wouldn't create a pin. All right, but I could still have John in the database because I could have John in as a person in this table. This will become a lot more clear when I actually do the example. But let's go through here and look at this again, okay? So I have a one-to-one relationship. What that means is that there is at most one record in the auxiliary table that is related to a record that's over here. Okay, with the supplemental, there were many. With the reference, there were many. With this one, there's only at most one. All right, it could be 0, it could be 1, but it's at most 1. And what we do is we have, again, just like we did on the supplemental and on the reference, we have a foreign key field that will receive the value of this table. It has its own primary key field. That's because this could actually be in a relationship with another table yet, if we wanted to. In fact, I've actually seen it where they've had one-to-one and then another one-to-one because they had other fields that could come into play that they wanted to group together. Or you could do it off of this one. Either way it would work. But don't worry about that right now. Okay. Usually a one-to-one, you'll see it like in this format. You may have a category relationship that categorizes records, but it's usually the only kind of other relationship that you would have to a auxiliary table. So I've got this now. I've got its fields in here. If I go and open that up so you could see it in design view, you'll see that it shows that the record identifier is required for sure. Why? Because it's in the alternate key. The alternate key for the auxiliary relationship, just like in the supplemental, is both the primary key value and this. I'm sorry, let me step back there. It is just the record identifier. If I go up to indexes, you'll see that the auxiliary, I'm sorry, the alternate key is just the lookup. And that's how I want it. All right. And of course, the primary key is the auto number field. And again, you won't usually use that. You won't even show it. All right. But in this case, I also have at least one other field that's going to be a required field. It wouldn't make sense. Let's say I didn't have any other fields in here except security. It wouldn't make sense for security not to be required. It's by the nature of the relationship, there's going to have to be a value in there in order for the record to be established anyway, because it is a one to one. So this is always going to be a required field, and I always set it as a required field just for that reason. But look, I also have security pin required, and I have security active required. Now, security active is a yes no field. In fact, that should be yes no here. I'm sorry about that. I've got that labeled incorrectly. Yes no here. Okay. Let me save that. I'll fix that in my example. Um, I've got the yes no field, and I even say that's required, but yes no field by its nature is either on or off. So you don't have to actually set the validation rule there if you don't want to. And I didn't, because sometimes that does cause problems on the yes no field. A little tip there that I should probably told you a long, long time ago. On yes no fields, you don't need to ever set those to be is not null. I don't even know why they have a validation rule on a yes no field. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, what I want here is that if they fill in one of these, they're going to fill in the other ones. Okay. Now, again, yes, no, you don't have to really fill it in. It's just going to be no by default, really, in that case. But if I put a security method on here, I want to have a pin on here. If I put a pin in here, I want to have a security method. So that's why those are both required together. But again, I don't have to have either. In that case, there won't be a record established. There'll only be a record established in this auxiliary table if there's actually a value in one of these fields, and then it'll be established. That's pretty powerful. Think about that. If I had something where I had a field that didn't take on a value very often, I could separate that out into a one-to-one relationship, and it would make my database a lot more efficient. I wouldn't have a lot of wasted record sizes. I wouldn't have fields with a lot of nulls in them. I could basically separate those out, and then when they take on a value, they get a little sub record. And when they don't get anything. It just doesn't even exist in the world. Okay. But anyway, we'll get back to the purpose for using a one-to-one toward the end here, because there's actually 7 or 8 reasons why you may want to use a one-to-one relationship. And I've already talked about a couple of them. So anyway, that's great. I've got this, but how do you work with it? Well, the way you work with it is by creating a query. And so what I want to do is basically somebody came in and said, "Hey, tell me all of John's information." All right. What I would do is I would create a query like this. I'm going to open a design view, and the first thing I would do is I would dump in all the fields from the person table. Now I only have one here. If I had others, I would put birth date in here and blah 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 and all the other ones. Wouldn't necessarily need to have the record identifier, because again, it doesn't mean anything. I also don't need to put the record identifier in from this one, because it doesn't really mean anything other than to help me establish relationships. But then what I do is I do put those other fields that are in this one. So I just basically take all the fields from one and all the fields the other, and that will give me what we would consider the complete record for each one of the people that we have in here. Let's run this query right now to see what we get. And you'll see what happens here. John had a security method and got a pin. And we also have its is yes no field. Oh boy, I forgot to put a caption on that too. Let me go back and do that. I need to fix this one up. Something easy to do though. I just need to put it. Well, I had a caption that said active. Why did that not show up? That's interesting. I got something going on there. Huh. Wonder why that happened. It does have a caption. And yet, when I ran the query, well, things you don't expect and they do happen, okay? I run the query and boy, it didn't replace it. You know what? I have actually seen this happen before. And it only happens in the data sheet. If you actually create a form from this, the caption would really be there. And by the way, if this were to happen and you do want to fix it in the data sheet, I may as well show you that since I'm here. One of the things I could have done on that query is I could go back here in design view and I could actually put a different caption on that field by going over here, highlighting that field. I think it's a property of that. Yeah, you can say caption right here. You can say active. And now I think that would work. Let's see. Yeah, see now it does say active. All right. Actually, glad that popped up. It gave me a chance to show you something. That I actually discovered that not long ago. I had something I was doing where I had a lot of fields that were just fine, the captions, and then all of a sudden they weren't fine. They were just using the name of the field. And I was like, what is going on there? Now, it was, again, only happening in the data sheet, and it was only when I was using a query for it, too, I noticed. But then I just went in and I just fixed the caption on each of those query fields basically, and it worked fine. But anyway, you see what I've got here. I've got John, and he had a security method and is going to put a security pin on there. And again, the active is either checked or unchecked. Tom had one too. Betty had one too. Veronica, we don't have security information on her right now. So all we see is Veronica coming from the person table, and we see nothing for her as far as the security information goes. And by the way, one of the reasons you're not seeing this required message here is because this one I actually put an input mask there to keep it 4 characters and uppercase. So when you put an input mask on, you can't have a format basically. Or I'm sorry, I had a format to make it uppercase. That's why, and because I made the format uppercase, I couldn't put a message on there. It wouldn't work for some reason. It's a flaw in Access. That's why I'm getting away from using these messages. I liked them at first. I did them on almost all my examples, but it's gotten to a point now where I don't use it very often. So, but anyway, go down here and you look, we've got Wonder Woman, yep, and Big Bob. They both had security information, so they both get both fields filled in. So that's kind of a neat thing, Yeah, could I have put these into person? You bet. But I wanted those separated for several reasons, okay? One reason is because I wanted to make sure that when this one was required, when this one received a value, this one received a value. I couldn't have done that if I had them both in person. The other thing is maybe my security information is managed by somebody else. In other words, somebody else is managing this table. I'm only managing the information in this table. Yet I may need to report on both of them together. And I could do that then. I could build a query and then have a report for both of these. But as it turns out, I can also manage both of those elements at the same time. I can manage both the person and the person's security through the same form. And I'll do that as part of the tutorial that I'm going to do next. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to save it because I did make some changes there and I want to remember I did that. Close it down. Thank you very much. Close that one while I'm at it. All right. And I'm going to go now right to the tutorial and we'll work that and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the give you a little summary of the reasons why you would want to have a one-to-one relationship. So we're going to do T06-02, and again, use the your name, but copy it and put in your name on there. And so I've already done that. Now, in this tutorial, we're not going from scratch, okay? I've already built a lot of the things that you would need to do ahead of time in order to create a one-to-one relationship. And I'm only doing that to speed things up. Everything you need to do to make this happen, you already know how to do it. So you know how to build a subject table. Again, the auxiliary table I built from copying the bottle object for an auxiliary table. An auxiliary table always is prefixed with TAU. So basically table auxiliary. That's what it means. All right. So I've got a customer, and the customer, some customers, or nowadays almost everybody has a credit card. But let's say I don't always know the credit card. So I want to establish a customer record, but I got fields for a credit card right here. I'm sorry, is the auxiliary for credit card. Uh, I've got fields for a credit card that basically, when one is filled in, all the other fields should really be filled in too at the same time. I want to do that. Not all of them, but some of them are grouped together and really are required together. Let's say it that way. So let's look at these tables, and I'm going to open it up in relationship view so you can see it, because I've already really built the relationship for the one I want to here for you. Okay, so the customer table, you can see I've got the customer name, mailing label, all this stuff, just like we do on a normal subject table. But then the credit card information, rather than putting that into the customer table, I separated that out into an auxiliary table. All right, so I've got the foreign key value that will receive the value, the primary key value of the customer's record, and then I have a field that is a foreign key field for a category relationship that will categorize the records in the auxiliary table. So it's the different types of credit cards. So I like American Express, Visa, MasterCard, maybe a PayPal credit card, whatever, Google Pay. Those would be the different types of credit cards I could have. And this will be my auxiliary. I'm sorry. This is my I keep calling it auxiliary, my alternate key field. Okay, because I'll only have one record in here for each customer. At most, one record in here for each customer. So I only have the customer a record for a customer in here. So this is a unique and required field, right? And that's my alternate key field. This is my auxiliary field, my first auxiliary field. But I also have this. I have the credit card number, the service code, the expiration date and month, the expiration date and year. And then you even get these three. Now, if you don't want those three, you could just delete them. That's fine. All right. But if you wanted to have a note or an attachment that's attached to the auxiliary actually itself, maybe it's a photo of the credit card or something like that, or maybe a statement that you made on that credit card. You could put that here, or you could just as easily have put that over here in the attachments of the other one. And then a data revision, and that would be revisions that you make actually just to the auxiliary record itself, not to the overall one. The overall one would be over here. But again, those aren't really necessary. If you want to just keep track of that information in these, you could do that. But I didn't keep it here because that's nice. If I have a note about the credit card, I could keep it with its information, usually in a tab, page on a tab controlled together. Now, this one's a required field. This is 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 a required field. Because typically, when I write down their credit card, I know the number, I know the service code, I know the date and month. Those wouldn't be unknown to me. So this is one of the situations that if I'm creating a record, I'm going to put all that information in at the same time. If I don't know any of it, then I don't create the record. Is what it amounts to. These aren't required though. Okay, they don't all have to be required. Okay, now I know if you had downloaded the lesson um, when I first posted it, I didn't state that, so I went back and fixed that. What's out there now actually says that, in the condition when you want to build something where you're grouping together required fields, you could have other fields that aren't required, but you would, in this case, would usually want at least two of them to be required. In other words, it really doesn't make sense to establish this record unless I really know more information. So otherwise, I could have just kept it over here as one required field, right? If it's two fields or more that are required together, that's why I separated it out. I know that's an unusual thing. I know it's kind of hard to grasp. I think once you see me actually add some information in this, it'll become a lot clearer. So that's how I set it up. Now the one-to-one relationship itself. Okay, I built it like I did any of the other ones. Okay, I took this one and I dragged it down to this one. All right. Now, how did it know it was a one-to-one? Well, let's go back and open up this in design view. And if I look at this one, I know that it's receiving the customer from the other one. Okay, it's going to receive that. I've got the lookup in here that says get it from that table, and that by itself, and the fact that and the fact that the index is just a single field. Actually, did I do that? Yeah. In this one, it's kind of interesting because I actually have uh, the the foreign key field here could be, you know what? I think I was on the wrong field before. This is the field. This is my alternate key field. I think I was on there. Yeah. Okay. That's my alternate key field. Yeah, I was on there. There's this lookup. All right. Again, I have the alternate key. And in this case, I could actually have another alternate key. All right. So what you've got here is I got the credit card number. That's always unique, right? So that's a field where not only is it unique, but I also would probably say it should be unique and required, that particular field. So that's the credit card number right here. And I did say that. Unique and required for any. So what that means is when required for any means that if of this group here, if I put one in, I need to put the other ones in. That's the message I'm trying to say there. It's required for any one of these. Okay. So if I put any one of these in, I really need to put something in for all of them. But I also tell them that this one needs to be unique. Okay. These ones don't have to be unique. I mean, obviously, I could have multiple credit cards in here that would expire in the same year. That could happen. I could have multiple of a certain type of credit card, but a credit card number is going to always be unique. No matter what kind of credit card it is, it will always be unique. So I could really use that as a secondary alternate key if I wanted to. All right, but this is always the alternate key that you always want to have an alternate key that's on the foreign key field that's receiving the value. Now, again, because that's unique, because I made that unique and required, because it's a single field alternate key, it can only take on one value from that other one. That's how it knows it's a one-to-one relationship. So if I'm going to come back here and undo this relationship. I'm going to delete it and build it again just so you can see it. All right. So now it's gone. I take the primary key from the customer. I drag it down to that foreign key field right here, customer dash identifier. And if you notice now, and I haven't turned the referential integrity on or anything, but look at the bottom here. It says relationship type. It knows that this can only be a one-to-one because I had that as a unique index. The alternate key is unique. It's a single field alternate key that's unique, and therefore it can only be a one-to-one. Somebody once, I remember once that I had a student that was building a supplemental relationship, and they said it kept coming up one-to-one. And I told them, well, it's because right now you've only got the foreign key field in your alternate key. You have to have something else. You have to have the supplement field in there too. I don't know why he changed it because he was using the template and he still changed it for some reason. But if you use the template, the supplement template, you'll notice that the receiving field and the supplement are in the alternate key. But in this one, it's just the receiving. Okay, it's just the foreign key field, and that's how it knows it's a one-to-one relationship. So now I need to enforce referential integrity, and so as always, cascade update. You went on. You always want cascade delete on. It doesn't make any sense at all for auxiliary relationship to exist if the customer relationship goes away. All right, 99.9999999% of the time, if the customer record went away, if there is an auxiliary record, you want that to go away too. Now, unless you want to archive all the credit cards that you ever took on and not really keep track of the customers, you could then turn cascade delete off, delete the customer, and keep the credit card. The cool thing about that is because you have the cut this identifier, it would know that it was related to a customer. But the problem is it's going to have the customer's primary key value in there. It's not going to have this value in there anymore because you took it away. That's why I always think if you delete the customer record, set it up so this one goes away automatically. So I always put cascade delete on, and I tell you that in a lot of the um, examples I give you, and in the tutorial, and in the notes for this. So, and again, in the summary in the reference that has the summary for all the relationships, it'll tell you always turn cascade delete on for a 1-1. So anyway, we've got this relationship. We've got it built. We've got it populated with data. We've got a query that was built to bring it. I'm sorry. Now what we need to do is we need to build a query to bring it together. Now I should show you too before we do that. I already started building. Oh, there's the other thing I want to show you is that there is a foreign key here that's classifying those records. Let me open this up just on the auxiliary table. And again, you're going to see the name of the customer because it acts as a foreign key field. So it's bringing that in, but it's really, again, just storing the primary key value that's there. But here's my credit card type. And again, it's in a foreign key, it's in a lookup relationship, a category relationship, I should say, using the lookup field. And we even have a lookup form that will allow us to change values or add values to the credit card type, and then credit card information. And again, you see here I've got 9 people in here, right, that have credit card information. But if I go over to the customer table and open it up, I've got a lot more than 9 people here. So in other words, I got a lot of customers who I don't even know their credit cards right now. Let's bring this all together. Okay, I want to basically establish a view that will bring back the customer information and then the credit card information for the customer. So to do that, I'm going to create a query. Oh, I should show you first. I already do have a form that's been built that has the information from the customer subject table. But that's it. It doesn't have a tab right now for the credit card. We will build that in here when we get after we get the query built. And again, I do have the lookup form that will populate the values of the credit card. So let's build a query now. And I'm just going to go out to query design. It's just right here, query design. And now I'm going, and if this is open, you can close it down. We won't need it for anything. Well, let me drop in what we need first. This comes up as a dialog box, so I got to select from first. I'm going to take customer. Let's customer and credit card. I'm just holding down my control key to highlight them both, and I'm going to add them both. All right. Close that down. Expand customer. I'll tell you what, I always like to have the one that's receiving on the right just so I can see it. Of course, I can't do that on junction tables. They have to go from both sides. But here we go. We've got this credit card. Okay. And I want all the fields from customer to be in here, including the primary key value. Now I could take this and select them all. I'm just holding down my shift key and then drag them all in there. Or see the star? That means take them all too. All right. And that's kind of a cool thing because if later on I were to add uh, a new field in here, it would automatically become part of this query. But another thing, if I do want to explicitly say, and I'm going to do it this way on this one, just double click at the top here and it'll select them all. Now I could drag them all in here. Now I've got them all in there. All right. Now I'm going to go over here to the very end of it. You'll see the last one in here was the mem data revision. That's fine. And now I want to pick the ones from the credit card. Again, I'm just going to double click that. I'm going to drag them all in here, but I don't need the record identifier for a credit card. All right, that's not going to be needed to do this. So I'm going to take this and delete its auth record. Just going to cut that out. All right, I didn't really delete the field. I just cut out from the query. Now, you might ask, why did I leave this one in here? Remember, this is going to be, we're going to use this as the source of our subject form, this query. We're not going to use a table like we've done up till now. We're going to actually use a query to be the source for this. So I have to have all those fields that I already have in there. And one of the fields I already have in there is the record identifier, because that's going to be used by my find record control that's in this form. So I need to have that one, but I don't need to have this one because these are just going to be in there as if they're other fields that are in customer when we get done with this. You'll see that. So anyway, I've got that. I'm going to save this right now. And when I do, it's going to prompt me for a name. And I'm just going to call it QRY. I think I just called it QRY customer. Okay. I believe that's what I called it. I'll have to look and make sure. Oh no, I'm sorry. I call it FQY customer, means form query. You could use QRY if you want to. It's just a general query prefix, but I am actually creating this for the form, so I'm going to use it FQY. So I've got FQY customer. I'm going to say OK, and now you see that was developed there. Close it down. Hey, if you want to run it, go ahead and run it. Just double click and see what happens. So you see I've got the record identifier, the name, blah, 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 blah. Hey, what happened here though? I've only got 9 people. Why did that happen? Think of the join. This is a join, right, that I did on that query. And right now it's an inner join. So it's not showing me all the customers. It's only showing me the customers that actually had data in the auxiliary table. And you see there is data for those in the auxiliary table fields. So the query did what it was supposed to do. We got to go fix the query. So let's go back to design view, and you'll see up here it's showing it as uh, an inner join. What I want to do is I want to make this a left outer join. So I'm going to right click on that, go to the join properties, change it to 2, say OK. And if you want to save it now and run it right away so you can see what happens. Now I've got all the customers, and I've got the ones that actually had values. Those are in there, but the other ones are showing that they don't have them yet. Okay, I haven't put anything in credit card information in for them yet. This is a nice view on its own, isn't it? And that's what we basically did. We created a view. But in the past, when we created views, we used it mainly for reports. And by the way, I could use this for a report right now if I want to. But I also want to manage both the customer and the customer's credit card stuff together. Now, when we wanted to do this with a supplement or with a junction, we created subforms for the receiver, but we don't have to do that here. These are just going to be in there one time. We're not going to have a lot of child records. We're going to have basically what you could consider to be one child, which would basically look like just a field for each of those auxiliary fields that we have. So what I could do now, and this is very powerful, I'm going to go to the customer form. I'm going to close down this relationship window because we're not going to do any more work on that. I'm going to open customer form in design view. All right. And if you're not seeing it right now, go to the property sheet for the form and you'll see that this is bound right now to TBL customer. Well, don't forget, so is this, but it's also bound to this. Okay. So the customer query, the form query for customer, is bound both to the customer table, the subject table for the customer, and the auxiliary table, the customer's credit card. So because those fields exist, these fields, the fields in here exist in here, I could use this and then have the other auxiliary fields available to me too. So what I'm saying here is I could go up here and I could hit this drop down, And you can see this where it says FQY customer. Yeah, not only are tables in here, but queries are in here too. And I can use the query now to be the manager for this. Okay. And you may have noticed when I did that, nothing changed here. If I had just taken out a field like customer name, all right, if I didn't have that in that query, I would get that little green thing that says it's unknown. It's not bound to anything. There is no field, all right. You can see here too, and then again, you won't see this in the more recent BAL objects, but the auto record identifier is there because we left the field, that field from customer in there. And that's what we want to actually navigate on, is that field, the field for the customer. So I've got that now, but look at what happened here. Oh, now, by the way, there is something else you need to do sometimes on this. You want to make sure that this didn't change. Sometimes I notice that when you change the record source, the navigation caption changes back to records or blank, I think it is. So you want to make sure that's still customers. The other thing that will always change is the order by. And I typically like to make sure that my records are going to come up in order of whatever the alternate key is. The alternate key for the main tape for the subject table is txt customer. So I'm going to put in txt customer dash name. And again, I don't have to say ascending. If I wanted to be reverse alphabetical order, I could hit space and then type in descending. If I wanted to type space ascending, I could, but it's ascending by default, so we're done here on that. I'm going to save that really quick, okay? And let's just open it up in form view, and you can see it didn't change anything. I still got the fields that I had before for the customer. But I also, in the background right now, also have the fields from the auxiliary table. So let's expose them. Let's put them in here so that we can manage the data with them too. All right. Just to show you that they're there, go to the add existing fields, and you'll see not only are the fields there from customer, but the ones from the customer auxiliary too. Everything from the customer auxiliary except for its primary key value, which we don't need to show. All right. So we're not going to have that in here. All right. Truthfully, I didn't really even need the customer identifier in here either. I could have taken that out. Maybe I should have. Did I show that in the? I have to go back and look at my query to see. Did I take that out? You know what? I didn't. I didn't include it in the query. So there's another one. I'm not going to show that because you already know who the customer is from here, and you'll see it up here in the search bar. So I really don't need that field here either, the one that says customer identifier. If it's in there, it's not going to hurt anything. If the primary key was in there, it's not going to hurt anything. Just don't use them. Don't drop them into the form, all right? Now, to make things efficient, I'm going to go back and fix that up, all right? So all I'm going to do is save the form. I'll probably have to close it down. Go back to the query, open up in design view. And again, what I'm doing here is I'm taking out the customer name, not the one that's from the customer though, the one that's from the auxiliary table, the foreign key. All right. So the foreign key that will hold the customer name is this one right here. I got to think about that. Will that work? Yeah, it will. Yeah, it will. Okay. So let me just make sure I didn't mess anything up. Yes. Okay. So we're working fine. All right, now I open up that customer table on design view, and I open up its properties again, and there's the query. And if I look at the existing data, now you'll see that the foreign key field is no longer there too. This is one of those times where doing that extra typing helps a lot. The fact that we could look at this and know that these are the fields right now that are bound to the customer table, and these are the fields right now that are bound to the auxiliary table for the customer. All right. And you see too, we also have the foreign key for the type. So we have that relationship that's still there too, that we can put type in there and it should work. The lookup should work for that, just like it always does. Now, I want to actually put these in here, these other fields. So I just want to look through my stuff to make sure I didn't miss anything up to that point. No, looks like I've got everything. Go to existing fields, and now we're going to drop those fields into this. Um, you know what? I think I actually showed you to do. Yeah, do that separately. Okay. I got. There's something I just noticed in the notes that's a little out of date, but it doesn't hurt us too much. All right. So I want to drop in right now all these ones that are prefixed with the table or have customer plus credit card. So I want to get this one all the way through to this one here. I want to get put those in here. Well, I could dump them into a tab that already exists if I really want to, okay? But I want to keep those all together. They're logic. It's logical to keep those all together. So I'm going to go up here to the tab control. Make sure you outline the whole thing, not just a page, the whole tab control, and do an insert page. Okay, now we've got that. Now it will show its properties. Go to the property sheet. Again, if you don't have this, if it's outlined like this right now, just right click down here into the body and it'll show that now it's activating the page. And we will make the page caption credit card. You know, when I first did this, it was credit cards mainly. Now we probably want to say money card. In fact, let's do that for fun. You could do either one; it doesn't really matter. But money card, because it could be a debit card or something like that, right? Um, and I want to put that right after this general tab. So I'm going to make it. So remember, general tab would be 0. So I'm going to make this one 1. And that should do it. So there it is. Okay, now I've got that there. And you notice I didn't name that tab. I could have. I could call it, I think it's, I forget, the CTP, I think, for control tab page. And then I could have said money card or something like that. Well, I could do that. Let's do it. Again, you wouldn't need to do this because it was generated. We're never going to refer to it anywhere. So this is one of those things where you don't have to use the naming conventions to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to say customer plus credit card. Well, I guess I did call it credit card in the thing, so I better call it credit card here too. Okay, and that would give me a visualization that if I know now that these are the fields that are coming from that. Of course, I'll know that by just looking at the fields too, because they'll have the reference on them. So okay, so now I'm ready. I could drop in the fields, and again, it's already highlighted the page. If it's not, make sure you highlight it. Right, just right click in there to get it. Again, if you're like this, just right click in here to get it back on. All right, and now we're going to go in and we're going to highlight the ones that have to do with the credit cards. I'm going to only pick for now these right here: the type, the credit card number, the service code, the expiration month, the expiration year. I'm just going to do those and bring those in because I want them all kind of together on this. So I'm going to move them all the way down here and drop. Oh, maybe I moved them too far down. I'm going to Control Z that because it just undimmed the. I'm going to put them right in here. There we go. Now, you notice the grayed over, that meant the page was ready to accept them. So now I've got those, and I could, you know, basically move them around, and I'm moving them together because they're all still selected together. Um, I'm going to say, hey, that's good there, and you could move them wherever you want to. I'm just going to say for now, that's good. All right. Now I'm going to drop in the notes about the credit card. So I'm going to put that, I'm going to put that right next to it. In fact, I probably should have just taken that right away too. Put that one right there. Doesn't give me a whole lot of room though to put notes in, does it? But I could always expand it to make it bigger. So I could write a lot of notes about this. And then I want the data revision information. Now, actually, before I do that, I'm going to put the attachment in here. Now, this is what's different, okay? I have step 5 where I drop in all the fields except the attachment. In other words, I put this data revision field in there. I may as well do that right now. I'm going to do that. All right. I get the credit card data revision information. Just going to put that over here. Put it right up next to this one. Drop it down. I think I mentioned you before. In older versions of Access, when you try to drop in the an attachment field, it used to make it a text box, and that was wrong. It should make it an attach. I'm sorry, it would make the control a text box control, and that won't work with an attachment field. You have to have an attachment control. So I actually have another step in the lesson 6 where I show you how to. I say go to the top here, hit this one, drop it in, hit this one, go in like this, and then bound that, open up its property, and bound it to the attachment field that you want. Okay, and that would be right here. Okay, and that now makes it ready to go, except for obviously our tab control, I'm sorry, our tab order is out of whack because this was the last thing I put in here. Maybe I wanted to go down, boom, and then up here and then down. And you might see here too that I don't have a really good name for this one. If I wanted to name it something else, I could. I don't have a good caption for this, so I definitely want to go in and change the caption to be maybe I'll call it credit card attachment or something like that. Um, if it was photo, I could say credit card photo. I'm just going to say credit card attachments because I can have more than one on there. All right. Now I've got that. And I would fix that up, obviously, make it look good and all. And go up there and reorder the fields or reorder the controls. So type, activate the page again and go up to, where's that again? Arrange. Always forget this. Oh, tab order right here. Okay. Oh, or you right click. Okay. Either way, because I got that activated, I go up and hit tab order, and you'll see attachment 282 is in there last, and I really want that before the revisions, so I can move that up now, and they'll be in the right order. All right. Now let me go out and I'll show you how that looks now. Okay. But I'm going to come back and show you the easier way to do this attachment now. They fixed it in Access. So I go in here and see you got credit cards now, and I got information and see the ones that had data in it. You see the data in there already, and I could go on and to the maybe one that doesn't, and I could add the data now. Now some of these fields are kind of small. I probably would want to make bigger. I've got, you notice that was a drop down. I'll talk about that in a second. The year it expires 2020. And I would do things like make a conditional format that shows that this expired already. If this date was before today's date or something like that, I could build that, or at least do it on the year. The year was before. I could do that. But remember, this will not just save this as it is right now. If I came up here and did a save, it's going to say you can't because you didn't give a credit card number. So I'd have to go in there and give it a number of some kind. And that's alphanumeric. I know it's usually just numbers. And if you wanted to do it so it's just numbers, you could do that. You can make it a long integer, but I wouldn't do that. I would just do it like that. Some people like to put dashes in there, so I would just make it alphanumeric. Again, I tried to save it now. It shouldn't save because I don't have the service code, so I'd have to put something in for that. And then once that's done, now I should be able to save the record. Yep, can. Okay, so that's how that works. And you can also see that the tab order is correct now. When I go, it goes down, and then it goes up to attachment and goes down. Now I told you before, you should never tab into an attachment. So that's something would need to fix. I would need to go up here, open up its property sheets, go down to the tab stop, and say no. And now I know I can't tab into that. Please do that. So many of you have been ignoring the tab order and the ability to move in and out of tab controls and things like that. Protected fields, enabled fields. Sometimes you don't want people to move into them. Be smart about that. Help your end user out a lot and do things like that. Now, as I said, building this was in step 6. As it turns out, if you got a newer version of Access, you don't need to do it as I did in step 6. There's a much easier way to do it, and that is I'm going to take all these out, do it again. Okay, Take them all out. All right. Going back to that existing fields, and I'm just going to, well, because I don't, it's going to force it down. I'm still going, I'm just going to take these for now. Okay, I'm going to go all the way down through notes. I'm going to drop them in, move them over. And again, you need to resize them and things like that, obviously. Oh, went too far over. Move them over. And again, you can move the captions in different places if you want to. If you wanted to put them up above them, spread them out, and do all those things. I would try to align the fields as best as you can. Now I'm going to take attachments, and again, make sure you highlight the whole thing because for some reason it lets you do just this one, and that will cause problems. Highlight the whole thing, and I'm going to highlight the next one too, and I'm going to drop those in together. And this, I believe now, is an attachment control. It should be, I think. No, it didn't. Isn't that weird? It put a text box in here. Now, the other time we did this, it came in as, so I guess you do need step 6. I apologize. Boy, that's got me bugged. We did this before where we just dropped them all in and it got the right thing. Why did that not work that time? I want to see. Maybe. No, I'm using Access 2013. Maybe they only fixed it in 2016. I bet you that's what's happened here. See, what should happen in 2016, I'm almost positive that when you drop that in like that, this actually does come in as a tab, as a attachment control. It comes in as that paper clip that we had above. All right, but when I went out and looked at this and looked at its property sheet, it shows it as a text box control, and I could tell it is. So if that happens to you, you will have to do step 6. You'll have to go in and manually create an attachment for that credit card attachment. Now I would tell you right now, if you didn't want to use that attachment, feel free not to do it. Okay, unless you really wanted to have a picture of the information of whatever the auxiliary is about. You really don't need to have this. You can just take it out. But if you do want it in there, at least in 2013, you're going to have to manually build it. Okay, I think in 2016, when you drop it in, it would come in just fine. So now that I did that, I'm going to have to really basically reproduce it. So let me go back and do that really quick. I'm going to add this field. Some people have asked me, well, could I still drop it in like that and then just change the control? No, there's no way to change a control. Once a control is in, it's in basically. So again, I'm going to cause these. I'm going to make these a little bit bigger. I'm going to make these a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to put that attachment in here, and I'm going to hit the paper clip, bring it down, just pull it out here somewhere, bound that field to the right, to that attachment field. So its control source is this attachment right here. No, wrong one. See, be careful because there's the attachment for the customer in here too. It's this one here for customer plus credit card. Put that one in there. And again, if you want to change the name of it, feel free. You don't really need to. And then I'm going to go up here to the caption, and I could do that on the property, the caption property, or I could just do it right here. I'm just going to say attachments. Maybe I should say credit card attachments since I say attachments for the overall record. All these little things you got to think about, right? But you know what? It's worth it. Again, I would position this theme better and all that. I'm not going to worry about all that right now. Work on the colors and all that other neat stuff. Again, go in and make sure that your tab order is correct. And I know it's not because this one came in there last, so I'm going to move it before the data revisions. But again, I really shouldn't even have to worry about that because I'm going to turn its tab and stop off, and I'll never have anybody tabbing into it anyway. So there we go. So that's all done. Let me go back and make sure it's really working. Okay. So I bring up credit card. Looks like everything's in place. Okay. You may notice that the expiration month is showing '09. I did that. I could have said the name of the month, but I decided to just make it '09 because most credit cards will just have a number for the month. But I have the drop down here where I've got the number and the month. But that was not in a category relationship. Where did that come from? Well, that's one of those value lists I talked about last time, and I will go into this in a second and show you it, right? But here's a situation where we won't be adding months. We won't be taking away months. This is something that is good forever. So I didn't really need to build a category relationship here. It is a small, confined, highly constrained and highly confined set of values that I could just express in the design of the field itself, and it'll be good forever. I will never have to go back in there and fix it, unless somebody decides to change how we do the calendar. I've been hearing that. I hear there's a real move to try to have 13-month calendar. Makes a little bit of sense. I don't know how it didn't happen that way to begin with. It would mean every, let's see, how would that work? It would mean that every month had 25 days or something like that. I can't remember what it is now. But anyway, one of the I would do certain things here, like I would go into these and make sure that they have an indicator to show that they are required. In fact, if you look at the step 7 in the tutorial, in the lessons tutorial, you'll see the different kinds of highlights I put on fields and things like that in order that people would know that they're required and stuff. And I even put a little message in there. In fact, I'll do that. Let me finish this first. Go to format. I'll hit shape outline, like my gold bar as I usually do for required fields. And then I'm going to do a thickness about there. I usually do that. Okay. But then one of the things I did in here is I actually went into, go back to design, and I actually dropped in. Am I still recording? Yeah, I think I am. I just had a message, and I wasn't sure if that was from the machine saying the recording stopped. Sorry about that. I'm just going to pick this one that says text, that says label on it, drop that in here, and I'm going to put a little note to the end user that says, note, if a credit card is entered, then all, why did I say text boxes outlining? I should say, because they would know the difference between a text box and it's okay, you can do it that way. All the, I should probably say input boxes outlined in gold are require a value. How about something like that? If I wanted to give the end user a message like that, I could do it, and obviously, it always does this. It wants to be bound to something. You just say ignore it, and then I would probably change the background to a different color, just so it stands out, something like that. Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, you get the idea. Fix that up, and then everything should be good. But when you're done, basically, then you've got a really nice form. Now, not only can you add information about new customers, but also if they have a credit card, their credit card stuff. And again, a record will only be created over in the auxiliary table if you actually put data in for the credit card then. All right. And of course, if you do put data in for the credit card, you have to put all the required data. All right. So again, don't be confused here. Some people will look at this and say, oh, if I put this in, I have to put the credit card information in. No, all we're saying here is that once you start putting credit card information in, then you have to put in all these fields. All right, because we're trying to establish a record basically in another table where these are required in the other table. They're not required in the table that this information is bound to. I know that takes a little bit of thought to get it, but after a while, doing this, after you've done this several times, you'll start understanding that is an extremely powerful thing and a great way to help you manage your data better. Definitely something that is very helpful for end users. It keeps them from getting to a situation where they're only giving partial data to something where it really needs complete data, and it's a way for you to actually structure that without having to put it into the customer table and setting all kinds of crazy validation rules in order to get it to work. You'd have to have quite a table validation rule to accomplish this same thing in the customer table. All right. So I did mention that this field right here, the month, is actually a values list. And so let me show you that. First off, you can see it right here that it came over. Okay, and I gave you a little thing about inheritance. Um, there's a new reference about inheritance. Let me go show you it. I think I put that in here. No, I didn't do that yet. I'm sorry. Um, Let me go look here. Did I do that? I began writing a new one about inheritance. Yes, I did. I'm sorry. There, there's a new um, reference called field inheritance where I talk about when you create a form, specifically when you create a control in a form, it will inherit certain properties that were related to the field that was defined back in the table. So you see that here where I've got the row source and the row source type and all that, and you see it looks like a value list. I did not build that here. That was built on the field that this control is attached to, and it was inherited here. All right, now here's the weird thing. You could change it here. Let's say I didn't want to include the month January. I could actually take that out of this list right now. And you know what? It would still work because that is more constraining than what was over in the other field. I can't make it less constraining. If I came in here right now and I added a field called, because I do limit it to the list, okay? If I added a 13th month, Saturnaria or something like that, okay? That, and I tried to pick that, it wouldn't accept it because it's limited into the list it knows about on the field. So I could be more constraining. I could change it here, override the inheritance, and be more constraining than what's on the field, but I can't be less constraining. All right. What I would tell you to do is never change it. Just leave it as it is. Some things won't show up. Things like, what is a good thing that doesn't show up? Some of the properties you won't see here, and you can override them, but it will still do. Oh, validation rules, for instance. If there was a validation rule on this field, it wouldn't show up here, okay? But it still applies from the table. You can override it here, but again, it has to be less constraining than the table. So let's say if this was a and I didn't mean to go off on a tangent here, but let's say I had this year here, okay, and I had a validation rule over the table that said it's between January 1st, 1900 and today, all right? I could actually come in here and make it between January 1st, 1950 and today, and it would work fine. I couldn't make it between January 1st, 1800 and today because that would be less constraining. It would fire the other rule if I put in anything that was before 1900. All right. So again, what I usually do is I don't mess with these. Okay, here. It's extremely rare for me to override what a field is doing or try to make it more constraining. Okay. I have done it in situations where I made specialized forms that only a few people would use and there was a special rule for them, then I have done it, okay? And I just want to make you aware that you could do it. A lot of times one of the things I do is I may give a different default value, and you're allowed to do that. You can override the default value completely. So if there was a default value on that field, I could put a different default value for the form and it would work. Those of you who attend the advanced class, the advanced seminar I do, I'll actually show you a way to do that so you can have what's called a dynamic default value on a field by doing it by manipulating this property, the default property in the form. Again, I did not mean to go too far down that path, but I do suggest you look at that information about field inheritance if you want to know more about doing that. But again, I would almost caution anybody in this class, don't override anything. See, even the status bar text, that was inherited from our description that was over in field. And one of the things I do in that since I'm here, I may as well show you it. This is totally off script what I'm doing right now. I show you some examples about what happens with inheritance. You know, which ones are literal and which ones are what we call implied inheritance. Okay, so you see here that an input mask is literally copied over, where validation rules are not, but they still apply back here at the table. This is the control itself. Okay, and then I give you a little bit of a summary of which ones do that you can have this one-time replication versus having what they call persistent inheritance. Okay, and really persistent inheritance only really happens on default values and validation rules, but again you could override the default value. So um, again, most of you don't worry about it. I know that's probably a lot more than you want to absorb, and you don't need to really know that unless you are trying to do some go out in the world and start doing this for a living. And then just be aware that is something that can happen regularly. You might have inheritance that you have to update on a form or on a control. But anyway, let's get back to this. I was showing you the value list for the month, and I said it was inherited over. But if I go back to customer table, open it up, and I know I always go and do that because I've got an object that's bound to it open. You go back to there and you look at oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong table. I want to go back to the auxiliary table. I forget where things are. Go back to the auxiliary table, and I open up the month. I should say I highlight the month. Go look at its lookup, and you'll see there's a value list of the months of the year. And what I did is I actually put two columns in here, so it does that. I got headers too. So I said the header is the number of the month and then the month name basically. And so it goes the number of the month, so one, and then January 2, February 3, March, blah 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 blah. And I did limit it to the list, which means that the values that could go in the field have to be picked from that list that's going to be in the drop down. And again, if I overrode it in the control, I could take things out, but I can't add things. All right, if I take things out, the limited list will still work, okay, because the things I'll have in there will still be in the list. But if I add something new to the list over in the controls row source property, it won't be this limit to the list will now not allow it to happen. In other words, it makes it less constraining, and that doesn't work. All right, so just be careful about that. Just don't override those properties and you'll be safe. All right, so now I've got that, and again, you'll see when I go over there that I've got this drop down, and I can pick something, and it actually just puts that in there. If I wanted to put the number and the name, I could have done that too. Okay, I could fix it so that the well, can I? No, actually, what I would do is I would just have these in here as 1 January 2, a single column. It's a 1 January 2, February 3, like that. Again, most credit cards, it just shows the number, so that's the way I want it to look here. So that's how to build a form, a subject form that has information in an auxiliary table that you also want to manage in the form. Now, as I mentioned, there are many reasons why you would want to have a one-to-one relationship in your database. I've talked about a few of them. I'm going to go over that again here really quick, okay? But I really want to highlight the ones I haven't talked about very much. So let me go back to the lesson. And this is in the lesson on page 18. All right. An auxiliary relationship is useful in several circumstances. The main one these days is because of security. You have confidential information, things like salaries or passwords or something that might need to be stored separate from the main body of data. Okay? When I say that, I could actually build an application where people could get to the customer information but not see the other data based on maybe whatever their role is in the company. So let's say I separated out the salary information into an auxiliary table from I've got an employee table, and I could have a field in there called salary, but I decided that's sensitive. I don't want just anybody seeing that. I'm going to create a form that's on the table customer, but I'm not going to show them that. Okay. Now I could always just not show the field, not show the control, but I'd always be worried about somebody somehow getting into the back door and getting that. They could copy, they could go to another Access database and link to it and then see that field and see that value. Another way I could do it is to separate that and put it into an auxiliary table and then have the auxiliary table maybe even in another database and then link to it from my database. I could still build the relationship even if it's in another database. And oh, by the way, that's true for all the relationships we've seen. The tables don't have to be in the same database file, they could be in different files. You can link them in and then create the relationship, and it should work. All right. Uh, if they're an SQL, they will work. I'll guarantee you they will work. So it's kind of neat. You can even have things over in Oracle. What's another reason for from a security standpoint? Again, I may want to give somebody in my group the ability to see the security information along with the uh, employees information, and then I could do this join and have a query that's on a forum that only they could get to, and so they can manage both. All right. I may have a security group at my company where they need to manage this information. They're going to have a form that just has an employee ID and the security information. Because they've got the ID and I've got the ID, I could still make that associate. I could still build that relationship as long as I can link to their file, as long as they give me permission to do that. So for confidential information, that's really important. I haven't talked too much about different ways of storing data. Toward the end of the class, I'll talk to you about some of the more breakthrough things that have happened in recent years. Probably the most breakthrough and most impactful things that have happened in big data in the last few years is this idea of having your data hosted by somebody else. Okay, we call that putting your data in the cloud. I'm sure you've dealt with applications in the cloud. Microsoft 365 is basically Microsoft Office in the cloud, okay? Meaning that you don't really have it on your machine. All your machine is doing is making a connection to a server somewhere in the world and running it as if it is a local thing. Well, we do the same thing with data. I can have local data that's actually there on my machine, or if I'm a company, there in my company, or I can have it out in the world in places like Amazon or Microsoft or IBM. There's a lot of places that offer what they call cloud services, and they even could do analytics for you and things like that for you when it's out there. Well, believe it or not, there are cloud services for security. Okay, where and if I'm a company that's worried about am I being secure, I don't want to have a data breach or anything like that. I could go to one of these companies and they pretty much guarantee you that they are doing all the things that they need to do so you won't have a security breach, that your stuff will ever be exposed to the world. Well, they say that. We know there's been instances where even they have had problems. But it costs a lot to do data security. And if you could rent that out rather than do that yourself, especially getting people who really know how to do it, that's probably a more attractive thing to do. But at the same time, you may every now and then need to access that security to do things like verify if people's logins are correctly or stuff like that. Having a one-to-one relationship is a way that you can connect from your local databases to databases that are out in the world and bring back information for a particular instance of a subject. So for an employee, for a building or something like that. Things that are confidential about that. So that's a big reason for using a one-to-one. One of the reasons most you one of the reasons it's most used nowadays. Okay, another is maintenance. Okay, now I'll tell you, this has kind of gone. This and data frequency. I'll talk about that in a second. Have kind of gone by the wayside. Okay, but yet some people still do this, and I can understand why you'd want to do it. If you really want to have an efficient database, these things help. Some data may change more frequently than other data. Okay, in other words, I may have data on a record that's stable, very, very stable, and then other data that changes a lot. Okay, I could separate the data out into that changes a lot out into an auxiliary table, and then that means the one that's stable, I may not have to back it up as often. In other words, let's say I've got an employee data record. There's 5 fields in there that are filled out when they first become an employee, and that stays with them their whole career. Why should I back that up every week, month, day, whatever your policy is for backing up data, for copying your data? All right. If it's the same all the time, you have it once, maybe back it up one time, and then that's it. All right. Now, granted, you could have other records being added and you do want to add that, but usually that is all you have to do is add those records or take out records that don't aren't needed anymore. You wouldn't have to update everybody's all the time. All right, where you may have another field where things change frequently about the person or whatever the subject is, and in that case, maybe you do need to back it up often. Maybe I've actually seen situations where they had to back up data every hour, and even then it wasn't enough because things are changing so quickly, and yet they had to be able to track anything that had ever been done. We have one database at Spirit that I know of that anytime there's a data change, they have to back it up. It's that important for us to keep track of what they call traceability of the information, that we have to do that. So and again, some of your cloud services will actually offer that. They will do continuous backup of your data, which is kind of neat. Okay, but if you're doing it yourself and you've got data that is infrequently, you could keep that in the subject table and then have an auxiliary table that has the frequent data that gets updated, and then just back up the auxiliary table all the time. That's really cool. I like that. That's a very efficient way of handling the management of your data. The administration of your data is to have something like that. Another reason is data sharing. Let's say I have a table that's got a lot of data in it. I want to share the data with somebody else, but not all of it. One thing I could do is have an auxiliary table that has that data that I'm going to share with somebody else. And then all I do is write a form that only includes that auxiliary information. Now, of course, I'm going to have an identifier for the subject. So I usually will have to have at least the auxiliary. I'm sorry, I keep saying auxiliary on that. The alternate key fields and then the auxiliary fields. Okay, but then I basically build a form for them that only gets to that information. They can't get to the other information. So that's another neat way of doing it. Or conversely, maybe once a month, I just give that auxiliary table to somebody else and they do with it whatever they want to. I actually had a customer not long back who every month shared a portion of their database with a supplier. And believe it or not, they were going out and replicating the entire database then opening up that file and deleting what they didn't want the supplier to see. And it took literally 8 hours for them to do that. I went in and wrote what was called a action query to basically replicate that data, uh, and they just delivered that to the customer. Now that is another way to do it, but the other way would have been I could have built them an auxiliary table, and they could have just given them that table. They could have let them link to that table, or exported it out into a different file and then give them that file. So that's another reason why you'd want to do a one-to-one. In fact, you could some of these reasons would also hold up with some of the other relationships we do, but especially a one-to-one, I could see it being used for that. Okay, you have unique fields for variants of the subject. So here I've got an example. Say that you have a table called persons, TBL persons. It has a lot of instances of persons. Okay, and say you have something in there that categorizes it. So we've got a category relationship, and in that we say the kind of person they are. So maybe we've got records for students in here, and we also have records for teachers. Okay, so I've got a field that we will pick to say whether they're a student or a teacher. Then there are fields that need to go in that table for students that the teachers that don't apply to the teachers, or vice versa, or both. Okay, in other words, say for students I want to track their undergraduate GPA. Okay, I don't need to do that for teachers, but for teachers I want to track how they did in tenure last time. Okay, now I wouldn't have multiple records of those things. Okay, it's only going to be one record for each of those. I could have a student table, I'm sorry, a person table, and have a one-to-one for person plus student, and have another one-to-one for person plus teacher, and then fields in there for the student in the student auxiliary table, and auxiliary fields for the teacher in the teacher's auxiliary table. And then whenever I put information, establish that a person's a student, basically, truthfully, I wouldn't even need the type anymore, because by filling in the information into students, I know they're a student. Okay, when I fill in information in the student's auxiliary table, I know they're a student. Conversely, when I fill in information in the teacher table, I know they're a teacher. Well, what's to keep people from filling in both of them? Well, that's where I would have to go in and write some macros or something. In fact, I would probably put the category relationship that they pick, that they're either a student or a teacher, and then have a macro in the background that, based on which one you picked, it will turn on or off the ability to get to the field. It'll either enable or disable the fields, and it could even make them visible or invisible. That's how I would do it, actually. The fields that apply to what kind of person they are. Now, yeah, here's the situation. They could pick something, put in auxiliary information for that person, and then go change them to the other kind. And now they got a record for them in students, and they're going to get a record in teacher. You know what? You may not mind that. Maybe they were a student at one time, and then they were also a teacher, and then that's fine. Otherwise, you're going to have to write some pretty intensive macros or program code that will wipe out the other record in favor of the other one. Okay, but again, it is a way for you to have unique fields in the subject. I should say variant unique fields I shouldn't call them unique fields, but variant fields in the subject, based on a certain type or a certain categorization of the record. The other one that has kind of fallen out of favor, but truthfully, it was the reason that one of the ones were even invented, was because of data frequency. Okay, so here again, I give you an explanation. In some cases, a field may only infrequently contain a value. In other words, it's usually null. All right? Now, you might right off the bat think, memo fields, for instance. Memo fields are usually hold null values. Okay? Once in a while, you may put something in a memo field. We have our note field. That's just in case there's something that needs to be documented about that instance. But I may not have anything, and actually, usually I won't. So usually its value is null. I say that right now that this results in a lot of empty values in your database. And I say, especially on memo or long text type fields, they're notorious for this, for having null values. The one-to-one relationship here is very helpful in overcoming at this, what I call inefficiency. I think it's very inefficient to have a lot of null values in your database. All right. To overcome that inefficiency, since the related auxiliary table is at most one record, okay, means it could be no records. It would only create a record if there really is a value for that field, if it was separated out into the auxiliary, okay? So I'm saying this, let's say I have a memo field, let's say it's notes, okay? And I'm only putting something in there maybe once every 1,000 or 10,000 records. I'm actually putting something in that memo field, right? I could separate that out into an auxiliary relationship of its own. Put the memo field in the auxiliary table with the auxiliary relationship back to its original subject table. And then that memo field, a record will only be created for that memo field when it actually really does have a value. In other words, it's not ever even going to be null. It just doesn't exist until there actually is something to put in that field, and then it'll create the record. Now, the reason I say this has fallen out of favor, why it's not a big deal anymore, in the early days of databases it was a huge deal. Because believe it or not, when I had something like a memo field, if I put a value in it, whatever size that field was, and I'm talking about computer size, it's memory size. So the size that your file gets is the memory size, okay? The RAM size of the file, okay? Every time I put a memo field in there, if I put another record, and of course it had a memo field, it would automatically get assigned the size of the memo field of any record before it that was the biggest memo, the biggest size it took on. So in other words, maybe I had 1,000 records that had nothing in it, no memo field. Okay, well, the size of that memo field is 0. Suddenly, I put a memo in there that's, say, 3 megabytes in size. Believe it or not, it would update all of the records before it to give it 3 megabytes of null space, and everyone after it would get at least 3 megabytes of null space until another one came along that was bigger than 3 megabytes. Now, you could have one that's smaller than 3 megabytes, it would still get 3 megabytes. But as soon as one came along that was bigger, say 5 megabytes, it would go back and update them all to be 5 megabytes. Well, you could tell it didn't take very long for databases to fill up really quick, all right? So one of the ways around this, and Mr. Cod did this for us, okay, and I'll tell you about EF Cod next time we have our in class. When we get to lecture 7, I'll tell you about Mr. Cod. But Mr. Cod, who was the one who invented relational database theory, Dr. Cod, I should say, Dr. Cod came up with the idea of a one-to-one that helped us with this situation, in that a null now would never take on any size, basically, because only memo fields would take on size. Now, you still had the situation that even the memo fields that were in the auxiliary table could still increase in size as bigger memos were added. All right, but typically it did save you. The growth of your file was a lot less dramatic. All right. Now, why has this fallen out of? Don't want to say it fallen out of favor. I know people who still do this simply because they think it is a more efficient way of structuring their database. But you really don't need to do it anymore, and here's why. Sometime in the early 80s, a method called dynamic memory allocation was adopted for PCs or for data for computers in general, where it basically for databases will only assign as much space for a field as is actually needed for that field. All right. Believe it or not, we didn't have that for about the first 25 years of doing databases. Okay. And it really didn't become well practiced until the early 90s. So I look at a lot of the data, even the early access databases I did, I separated my memo fields often simply because of this situation. They were filling up too quick. And of course, if I had a memo field where things were going in memo fields all the time, then that's usually a clue to me that I need other fields anyway, you know? So uh, it was neat because I was able to monitor that auxiliary field, the memo fields by themselves to find out what kind of growth I was getting in. And that usually was an indicator to me that I needed to do other things to my database. But it also kept my databases very efficient. So, um, in the case when you want to do that, obviously you basically build an auxiliary table, and all it usually will have in it, and again, you'll do this for every single field that you want to separate, okay, and this for data frequency, not for the other things I talked about, okay. You can have a lot more than one auxiliary field in that case. But in the case where you're trying to isolate a field, you will build an auxiliary table that is unique to that field. It'll have its own, it will have a primary key field like they always do. It'll have the foreign key field that relates it to the sending, and it'll have that field that you separated out, and it will be a required field always. All right. Now, again, you could have as many one-to-one relationships as you want coming from a subject table. And so if you have many memo fields, you could have many auxiliary tables if you wanted, if this came into play. For this class, I would not recommend you do that, okay? Because of data frequency, separate your memo fields or any other field from your subject table. But for these other reasons, you may want to consider it. And for this last reason, I would recommend it. Okay, and that is again, you have a bunch of fields where they have an association among themselves. What I mean there is that if one field receives a value, other fields should receive a value. All right, and that's what we had in the case of the credit card. We had a case where if there was a credit card type or a credit card number or a credit card service code or a month or a year, if you put in any one of those, you should really put in all the rest of them at the same time. Okay, again, to try to do that from a subject table would require a hellacious table validation rule. You know, writing a validation between fields and say, if this one takes a value, then this one has to take a value, and that one, and that one, and that one. And if this one takes a value, this one, and this one, and this one. And if this, you got a lot of ands and ors that are coming into play to a point where it gets exponentially difficult to do it. You know, the more fields that come into play. We had 5 fields here. I would not want to write that table validation rule, but it was extremely easy to do using a one-to-one. So for me, this is the main reason I use the one-to-one relationships. And if you get that situation in your project where you have 2 fields where basically the value of one field, if you put a value on one field and that means that you have to have values on the other ones, then you want to use a one-to-one relationship in order to have those multiple required fields basically. Now it could also have a field that's not required. That's fine. All right. But you will have at least two of your auxiliary fields will be required. Otherwise, there's no need to do it. If only one's required, you could keep them all back on the subject table. All right. But if one of them's required, if 2 of them are always required together, in other words, I make one, the other one has to have a value. Then you can do this group association using a one-to-one. When I'll tell you, for years I studied the one-to-one, and the first 5 of these made perfect sense. But I kept still questioning how often should I use it. I used it for the data frequencies in the early days because of the situation before we had dynamic memory. I've had situations on each one of these, but they are kind of rare. Okay, when it hit me, we could use it for this. And in fact, I'll tell you something. I have never seen any other author document this. Okay, if somebody did, I'd like to find out. It could be one of those things that database specialists just know this for some reason. But for when it occurred to me that I could do this using a one-to-one, it was a true revelation. Suddenly, the one-to-one relationship became very popular with me, and I used it quite a bit to do this kind of operation. So, anyway, it's an interesting relationship. Again, I don't require it for anything other than you know about it. When you do your projects, I don't require it, but if you do it, I will give you credit for doing it too. I'm usually very impressed when somebody uses a one-to-one relationship and uses it for something worthwhile and doesn't just do it for the sake of doing it. So anyway, I think that's it for this lesson. Let me just check my notes. Yes, it is. I should say for this video. The next part will be about how to use, now that we have seen all 8 relationships, which are very powerful. Again, look at the references that are related to those topics, those relationship topics. Look at the summary. Look at the referential integrity rules of thumb. Look at the general method for creating relationships. Again, that is something that you can use as a checklist. I've given you a lot of information because, again, this class is about 3 things, and I've said this before. One is about data modeling, which its auxiliary is it's about data normalization. And by using these relationships correctly, you by default have learned how to do normalization. Toward the end of the class, I might mention to you about normal forms, and that doesn't mean the subject forms or the forms that we use objects for. It's another. In this case, forms is like normalization templates or normalization rules. I think that'd be a better way of saying it. Okay, but there are things that's called normal form, and those normal forms basically, when you see them and you think about the things we've learned, you'll realize that you've learned them all. They are very powerful, and for relational databases, what we strive to do is to be what's called at least third normal form. If you do everything the way I've shown you in class and you use the BAL correctly, everything will by default be third normal form, and some things will actually be fourth normal form. And again, I'll talk about that toward the end of the class. But for what we've been doing now, again, the relationships are the heart of this class. You've learned how to do data modeling. So now we're going to really move into the second part, which we've done elements of this already, which is to create applications. Okay. In the end, information systems are a combination of your data and the thing that is going to process your data. And the thing that processes our data is the database application. Okay. Now, other things could process the data that you create with a database. Your databases will be available to other things to use, to things like discrete event simulations or something like that. Okay. Or to inventory control systems that your company might have. They could access your database by linking to it. Okay. But we're going to build an application to help manage the data directly, what we call a relational database management system. All right, and that's what we're going to do in lesson 7. And to do that, there is one more thing I need to show you about using relationships with reports, because I think you've seen everything you need to know in order to use relationships in forms. But in reports, there is another unusual, I shouldn't say unusual, another way of utilizing them where the relationships don't come into play as much, but yet the database structure could be actually segregated to allow different kinds of reports to work together. All right, I know that is confusing, but you'll understand it more when you see the next video. So I'm going to stop this video here. We'll go to the next one where I do a what's called a multiple subject report, and then after that we will know everything we need to do in order to create an application in Access, other than how to I'm sorry, let me step back there. We'll have all the objects that we need in order to create an application, so that the next thing we can learn is how to navigate the objects and then compile them into something that we could deliver to our end user. And that will be done in lesson 7. So we'll end this video here and we'll go on to the multi-subject report one next. Thanks very much.